Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 4th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Today's reading actually just picks up exactly where we left off last week. Jesus in the synagogue, just after he's read the scriptures. Then he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him, and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They said, "Is not this Joseph's son?" He said to them, "Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, 'Doctor, cure yourself.' And you will say, 'Do here also in your hometown the things that we heard you did at Capernaum.' And he said, 'Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in the prophet's hometown. But the truth is, there were many widows in Israel in the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, and there was a severe famine over all the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them except to a widow at Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian." Then when they heard this, all the synagogue was filled with rage. They got up, drove him out of the town, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off the cliff. But he passed through the midst of them and went on his way. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. You hear me okay? You know, there's a time in my ministry when I used to require all couples wanting to be married to meet with me for at least a minimum of 6 counseling sessions. And in those sessions, we would talk about everything from family history to money management to sexual expectations within the marriage. We would explore their personalities, their likes, their dislikes, their moods, their dreams, their faith, their lack of faith. But by far the most interesting session would almost always be when, with their permission and without any prior warning, I would ask the couple to empty the contents of their purse or wallet onto the coffee table in front of them. Women in particularly seem to like this exercise. Generally, they were more curious about their fiancé's wallet than the man was about seeing the contents of their beloved's purse. Anyway, the unveiling would sometimes be a bit awkward, sometimes embarrassing. Most of the time it was full of nice surprises, and it always was very informative. You know, it's been said that you can tell a lot about a person by what they keep in their wallet, their purse. And I've seen just about everything imaginable be emptied out on that coffee table. Screwdrivers and bits, bullets, a ripe peach. Here's one, the tooth of a black bear, a 100-watt bulb. And of course, there's always the usual things that people would tend to carry around with them. There was the pictures of loved ones, credit cards, driver's license, money, antacids, chewing gum, bobby pins, hairbrushes, etc., etc., etc. But more often than not, there would also be a folded up piece of paper, tucked back in the back someplace, in that wallet or purse. It had an inspirational saying or a poem or a verse of scripture written on it that meant something to that person. I don't know, maybe many of you carry some of that around with you as well. But, as Alec Baldwin and the men of Capital One commercials would say, what's in your wallet? If I were to ask you to empty out your purse or wallet this morning in front of everyone, what sort of interesting thing would we find in there? What would those contents tell us about you? Well, here is my wallet. I carry it every single day. If you were to look through this, you would find, the normal everyday kinds of things. My driver's license, my credit cards, pictures of Sandy and Noah, an old season pass to Silver Dollar City, this is tucked in there. You'd also find an advance directive in the event of my death, showing the existence of a living will and a durable power of attorney. My organ donor card. And in the very back of that wallet, my wallet, You open that up, go to the very, very back, you find it right back there in the very back. Piece of paper, with a prayer on it. I've carried this for years and years and years. Though I'm not an alcoholic or suffering from substance abuse, I always carry that prayer with me in my wallet. A prayer that's well known to those on the road to recovery. It's called the Serenity Prayer. Now, most recovering alcoholics and addicts can recite this prayer from memory, and it's helped them and encouraged them during the healing process of their recovery. Of course, it goes like this: God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, much to my surprise, 20 or 25 years ago, I learned that this version of the Serenity Prayer was not the original version. The original version was written in 1943 by a Christian pastor and theologian by the name of Reinhold Niebuhr. It is this version that I carry in my wallet. Why? Because his focus wasn't so much on the individual as it was on the whole community of God, the whole human community. His emphasis was clearly on the grace and the divine power of God, and not so much on the strength or the ability of the people offering the prayer. Instead of saying, God, grant me the serenity, Niebuhr actually wrote, God, give us grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed. Courage to change the things that should be changed. And the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. I think it's a wonderful prayer. It's said something to me for many, many years. For 7 decades now, 7 decades, Pastor Niebuhr's prayer in its original form or in its adapted form has been an outstanding source of strength and comfort to countless people all over the world who found it difficult to love themselves and therefore to love others. It has helped them rediscover the joy of life. It's helped them to be patient with others and with themselves as they learn how to value themselves again and how to love and value those around them. Recovery is a process. Life is a process, and it takes patience. But patience isn't easy in an impatient world, is it? I learned purely by accident that the word patience comes from the Latin word patior, which means to suffer. That surprised me. To have patience is to experience suffering. Now, those most likely to use Pastor Niebuhr's prayer probably know better than most the truth of that statement, but it still surprised me. Wouldn't you think the opposite would be true? That impatience would cause suffering? Hasn't that been your experience? Certainly been mine. When my patience is tested, I find that I suffer immeasurably. I have 2 puppies at home, I can tell you. My gosh. It's awful. I hate being patient. It drives me crazy. Waiting in line at the grocery store. Driving behind some idiot that's going 45 and a 65. Waiting for 30 minutes on the phone for a customer service representative to talk to me, and then not understanding a single solitary word they say to me when they do finally talk to me. The suffering's horrible. My impatience stresses me out. But as I have aged, I've grown to understand that impatience really isn't about suffering at all. I've learned that impatience is simply a form of arrogance. A kind of condescension that tends to devalue a process or demean people. There's nothing loving about impatience. Nothing. If I'm truthful with myself, I know that I use my impatience to elevate myself and to put others in their place. How dare they inconvenience me? Huh? Isn't that what road rage is all about? And other forms of anger. Impatience objectifies people, making them into things that can be controlled and used and abused. You know, we may claim to love a person, but how we really feel about that person becomes crystal clear when that person makes us wait. Isn't it true? Husbands, do I hear an amen? Huh? Wives? If We may claim that we want to build a compassionate and caring community, a church where joy and peace are shared by everyone. But how we really feel about this community and this church becomes crystal clear when the process of building such a community is slow and awkward and time-consuming. Too often people quickly abandon their hope of ever having a loving community, a caring community, because impatience undermines the process. And they leave frustrated and angry. Impatience can be so destructive. Arrogant condescension. My wants, my needs are what's important, not what others want. You know, if you will look at your bulletin, in our second lesson for today, the Apostle Paul gets right to the heart of the matter when he tells us that love is what? Patient. Did you find that as surprising as I did? That that's the first thing that he says about love? That love is patient. Well, it is. It's the first thing he talks about. And if patience, is synonymous with suffering, then Paul is actually telling us to love is to suffer. You know, I like the old King James version of this particular passage. It reads, love suffereth long. Remember that? Love suffereth long. I think that's a beautiful phrase. Paul goes on to say that love isn't selfish or controlling or manipulative. It doesn't try to demean or diminish or devalue or trivialize a person or a process. Love suffereth long, it says. Paul's trying to tell us that if love is to be experienced at its deepest and richest level, then struggle is inevitable. Pain is a certainty. One cannot love and not know pain and suffering. One cannot know joy and not know sorrow. That's simply the way it is. The poet Gibran said that joy and sorrow are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. He wrote, "Is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hollowed with knives? The deeper that suffering carves into your being," he says, "the more joy you can contain." But we're an impatient people, aren't we? We don't like struggling. We don't like suffering. In fact, we'll do pretty much whatever it takes to avoid any form of suffering in our society today, including loving others, if loving others means that we are to be in any way inconvenienced or cause discomfort. Now, we don't admit that out loud. We're good Christians. We know that we're supposed to love everybody. But we don't. Let's get real. We don't. Pain avoidance is a priority in our culture and in our time, so what do? We hide. We make up clever excuses to avoid the whole business of caring about others, sharing our loves with them, or sharing our lives with them. And suddenly we become too busy. As a pastor, I hear this all the time. "Oh, I'd really like to serve on that committee. I would teach Sunday school. I'd really like to attend your Bible study, but you know, I'm just so darn busy right now." Really. If it is true that a person will make time to do those things they deem to be important in their lives, then what is that person really telling me? What message is clearly being sent? Yeah, you know, I do. I know you know. I'm not that important. Neither is the church, or other people, or sharing life with others. It's not that important. Community is impossible for impatient people. Or to put it another way, community is impossible for people unwilling to suffer, unwilling to enter that daily struggle, unwilling to pour out their love in order to find intimacy and meaning in their lives, and everyone is poorer for it. You remember M. Scott Peck? Some of you will. The famous psychiatrist. He wrote a wildly popular book about 30, 40 years ago called The Road Less Traveled. Any of you remember that? Well, he wrote another book a few years after that called A World Waiting to Be Born. And in that book, he said that pain and suffering is necessary. In fact, it's essential for all organisms, whether they be individuals, groups, or nations, if they hope to experience healing and health. And he goes on to say that healing and health come from the same Anglo-Saxon root that says whole or holy. So a person who avoids obvious issues in his or her life isn't whole. A corporation or a church that's blind to its problems is not and cannot be healthy. It must enter the struggle. It must experience the pain. And it must be willing to suffer so that it might be healed and made whole. It is in meeting reality, says Dr. Peck, not in turning away from it, that people and organizations will find their salvation. For salvation is ultimate healing. It's being made whole. It's being made complete, he said. Now, Jesus is often referred to as the great physician, not because he healed a few people a couple thousand years ago, but because he loved us enough to enter our human struggle and to share his life with us and to heal us. He made whole what was broken. His last words from the cross were, "It is finished." But more accurately, look at the Greek. It is a completion. A completion. God was willing to get involved and to suffer and die if need be, to bring about the healing and the wholeness of the world. And it continues. God's Holy Spirit, the Spirit of pure love, is a dynamic force in our world today, helping us heal wounds and mend brokenness, helping us create new worlds and open up possibilities that we never dreamed of otherwise. And I'm always amazed at what people can do when they're willing to love, willing to suffer, willing to open themselves to others, no matter what it takes. Back in the late 1980s, I saw a documentary on PBS that truly mystified me and moved me. I've never forgotten it. It was about a boy who was born blind and mute. And due to certain deformities, he knew he would never be able to speak. He was also diagnosed as severely autistic. Doctors tried to be optimistic, but in reality, they held very little hope that the boy would ever be able to communicate with the world around him. Instead, he would be forever imprisoned in his own world. The parents were strongly encouraged, on film, to institutionalize the boy. But they flatly and resolutely and absolutely rejected that idea. Their love wouldn't allow that. They willingly entered into the daily struggle to find the healing and the wholeness that they needed with this boy. They believed that somehow, some way, that boy, that son of theirs, would eventually communicate with them. Now, as the boy matured, it was discovered that he loved music. He would stop hitting himself and banging his head and rocking back and forth, and instead straighten up and smile whenever he heard music of any kind. It was also discovered that he had a remarkable gift for playing the piano. His hands, which were normally constricted, would relax completely when placed on the piano keyboard. And he played beautifully. No one could account for the gift. No one had taught him. It was just there. If he could hear it, he could play it. Well, the boy's mother began to listen carefully to what he played and when he played it. And one day she realized that he was communicating with her. She would ask him a question, and he would take great pleasure in answering her with his music. He especially loved to answer using commercial jingles that he heard on television. For instance, she asked if he was hungry. He would smile and gleefully play Pizza Hut, making it great. Well, one afternoon, as the boy sat on his piano bench, as he usually did for the better part of each day, his mother became overwhelmed by his innocence, the innocence of her son, as he sat there holding himself, rocking back and forth. So she went over to him and she held him in her arms and she kissed him and she said, "Do you know that Jesus loves you?" And the boy sat very still, and then he began to cry. And with great passion, he played Amazing Grace. That boy knew that Jesus loved him because he knew that his mother loved him. That hers was a love born of patience and kindness and self-sacrifice. The same kind of love that Jesus has for you and me. To love is to suffer. To love is to enter the struggle of another and to share their pain, to not be afraid. But with patience and kindness, new worlds are created by that kind of love. A love that's shared and steeped in the sacredness of God. Personally, I think God is present in every act of love. That God's holiness and healing touches us whenever we love one another. Whenever we share with those who are lonely, whenever we share our food with the hungry, care for the sick, the dying, comfort those who mourn. It's not easy, is it? Patience isn't easy in an impatient world. To love is to suffer. And that's why we pray, God, give us grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed. Courage to change the things that should be changed. And the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other. As your pastor, I'm speaking on behalf of my wife and myself. May you love until your heart bursts. Or as the poet says, may you always know the pain of too much tenderness in your life. God bless you all.